Have Catherine Rampell, economics editor at The Bulwark and co-host of the weekend primetime Yard Year. Also joining us we have Ankush Kardori, former federal prosecutor and senior writer with Politico magazine. Can I ask you what we heard from the president there, Catherine? What did the president mean when he said he could destroy another? That is not an economic question, but I think he means that he can do whatever he wants. He thinks that he is not constrained by the Constitution or Congress or Inspector Generals or, for that matter, the Supreme Court, as it turns out. So what do you see as the immediate impact of this ruling, the going from 10% to 15% within a matter of 24 hours? The real question is why he didn't do 15% yesterday, honestly, because the law that he is referencing to impose these new tariffs, to replace the tariffs the Supreme Court said that he cannot impose, allows for a maximum of 15% taxes or tariffs for the next 150 days. So I don't know why he didn't do it to begin with. He's not a guy who's known exactly for being a policy wonk or for doing his homework. So maybe he just said 10% sounded really nice and then somebody told him, you can actually make it higher. And he did. I don't know. But, you know, the Supreme Court really handed him a gift here. He did not have to impose tariffs of 10%, 15%, any other amount. He could have just said, you know what, we are going to accept this gift from the Supreme Court, which is effectively cutting taxes for Americans, and then run with it. And the refunds that will be due, or should be due, that's a whole other question. To the businesses that have already remitted these taxes, that's going to be a nice shot in the arm, a nice stimulus for them. He could have just said, thank you. I appreciate it. We are now going to have our golden age of the economy that I have been promising because we are going to get our boot off your necks. And instead, of course, he decided to try to reconstitute those taxes and effectively punish not just foreign countries, as you pointed out, but American consumers as well. For sure. And Kush, is this new tariff move by the president constitutional or will it face legal challenges? What are the current challenges? I and many other folks WHO have been following this issue expected this Section 122 tariff to kick in immediately. Catherine is right, it could have immediately gone up to 15%. The statute refers to a balance of payment deficit as a triggering mechanism for this tariff authority. Trump has referred to trade deficits. Balance of payment deficits are not exactly the same thing as trade deficits. Now, I'm sure Catherine could speak more articulately about that than I could, but it's just to say that I could envision a challenge where someone says, well, no, actually you can't justify even these tariffs on the theory that you've articulated. But trade courts tend to be quite deferential and could even be deferential on an interpretive question like that in favor of Trump. But that's just to say it is a potentially litigable issue. And then, of course, there's going to be this question about what happens after the 5-month period runs out because this provision only allows a 150-day period without Congress re-upping it. And I think Trump maintained a little bit of wiggle room on the question of whether he can just re-up 150-day successive periods without having to go to Congress. Now, if we take a very big step back from all this, I think this is now firmly back into the political policy realm. Trump has been claiming for the last year that he has this unlimited unilateral authority that somehow Congress gave to him in this statute. All of his authority for imposing tariffs comes from the Constitution and congressional authority. That means if he goes forward with any of these tariffs, even today's, it is only going to be possible with the implicit blessing of Republicans in Congress. They could stop and repeal any or all of the tariff authority he's going to be using. There's a big question whether they will be able to do that. Because if we look at the numbers of disapproval, it's 64% right now of Americans WHO say they disapprove. It is not foreign countries as the president has insisted repeatedly. So how might this ruling change the overall dynamic? It turns out Americans are upset about affordability. Gee, I wonder why they might disapprove of policies that make things less affordable, which is exactly the case here. Again, tariffs or taxes. There have been a bunch of studies from the Congressional Budget Office, from researchers at the New York Fed and elsewhere, finding that the vast majority of these tariff costs are being passed along to regular Americans, 90%, 95%. So, of course, Americans are upset by this. And there were numbers that came out today from the Yale Budget Lab finding that if you include these new 15% tariffs from today, The typical American household is paying something like an additional $1,700 over the course of just that 150-day period because of the totality of Trump's tariffs. So yes, Americans do not like tariffs. They are making life much more expensive. And I don't understand why Trump is deciding to double down on all of this given that people hate them, they are expensive, and they don't really seem to be achieving the concessions he claimed they would be achieving. The other piece of all of this is that his negotiations with other countries, the people that are supposed to extract these painful concessions, maybe could have worked when he could on a whim impose tariffs. But the fact is these additional tariffs that he's putting in place to reconstitute the ones that were vacated by the Supreme Court and deemed illegal require a lot more process. They're not something that he can just do with a tweet. There has to be actual due process, notice, comment, hearings, and so on. So they will be less effective as a tool. Then the president responded to this ruling with personal attacks on the justices he appointed. He said, "I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. Are you surprised by their decision? I am. Do you regret nominating them? I think their decision was terrible. I think it's an embarrassment to their families. Is this kind of presidential public disapproval of Supreme Court justices unprecedented? I've never seen anything like that in recent years. It was very obnoxious, obviously. But the bigger point is this, their legal position was very weak from the start. Many trade specialists believed it was plainly illegal. The fact that he managed to get any justices on board reflects the partisanship that is prevailing. It should have been 9-0 against the tariffs. For the last year plus, the president and his advisors have been making threats against allies and adversaries based on a tool that courts kept telling them was illegal. This has been a remarkable political and diplomatic debacle. And we're in the middle of the midterm season. Investigations have already begun. These things are going to start to kick in, and it will become very apparent to American voters that the tariffs are there because of Trump and the Republican Party by November. He may have expected the Supreme Court to side with him again, as it had in other cases. But this time even that coalition did not hold. Quick answer to what happens with the trade deals. No, countries are not getting money back. The actual money was paid by American companies. They either passed those costs to consumers or tried to work out deals with foreign suppliers. But the money that was paid is not being returned.